In the golden glow of 1960s Hollywood, two stars stood at very different crossroads. One was the effortless king of cool, Dean Martin, a man whose velvet voice and half-smile could melt an audience in seconds. To the world, he was relaxed and touchable, always in control. The other was bold, intelligent, and fiercely independent Shirley MacLaine, an actress who didn't just play roles, she challenged them. She asked questions no one else dared to ask. She stood her ground in a town built on compromise. The film set buzzed with tension that afternoon. Massive studio lights hung overhead, warming the carefully constructed living room set. Assistants whispered cues. Makeup artists hovered nearby. The director clutched his clipboard. Today was the big romantic scene. The script called for a slow approach, lingering eye contact, and finally the kiss. Simple. Predictable. Safe. But as rehearsals began, something felt off. Shirley stood across from Dean, script folded in her hand. She studied the lines again. Then she looked up at the director. "I don't think she would kiss him," she said calmly. The room went silent. The director blinked. "It's in the script." "I know," Shirley replied. "But it doesn't make sense, not yet." She doesn't trust him. She's not there emotionally. A murmur passed through the crew. No one usually questioned romantic scenes, especially not opposite Dean Martin. Audiences expected charm. Studios expected chemistry. Dean leaned casually against the piano prop, watching quietly. No irritation. No ego. Just curiosity. The director sighed. "We don't have time to rewrite." Shirley didn't raise her voice. She didn't storm off. She simply said, "Then we're telling the wrong story." Those words landed heavier than anyone expected. Hollywood, at the time, ran on formulas. Romance meant a kiss. Chemistry meant compliance. Female leads often followed the arc written for them, no questions asked. But Shirley MacLaine had never been formula. The tension built. A production assistant whispered, "This could delay the whole day." Finally, all eyes turned to Dean. What would he say? After all, he was the bigger box office draw. He could insist. He could laugh it off. He could make it uncomfortable. Instead, Dean pushed himself off the piano and walked toward Shirley. "You think she wouldn't kiss him?" he asked softly. "She wouldn't," Shirley replied. "Not unless he earns it." Dean studied her for a moment, not as a co-star, but as a storyteller. Then he smiled. "Well," he said, turning to the director, "guess we better earn it." The room shifted. The director hesitated. "Dean, we're on schedule, let's try it her way." Dean interrupted gently. "One take. If it doesn't work, we go back." The crew exchanged surprised glances. The biggest star on set had just supported the rewrite. Cameras rolled. This time, the scene unfolded differently. Instead of moving in for a kiss, Dean's character stopped short. He held her gaze. His usual playful smirk softened. "I don't deserve you yet," he said, the line he improvised. Shirley's eyes flickered with something real. Surprise. Vulnerability. "And maybe you never will," she answered, also unscripted. No kiss. Just silence. Just tension. Just honesty. The director whispered, "Keep rolling." Dean took a slow step back, not forward. Respect instead of pursuit. And in that moment, something powerful happened. The chemistry wasn't forced. It wasn't staged. It wasn't physical. It was earned. When the scene ended, the set was quiet, not with tension this time, but awe. The cinematographer lowered his camera. "That's better than the kiss," he muttered. The director replayed the footage. What the camera caught wasn't scandal or rebellion. It was growth. It was two actors protecting the emotional truth of a story. And something else, too, something audiences would later feel without knowing why. Respect. Dean walked back to his chair, lighting a cigarette, calm as ever. Shirley approached him. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged. "Kid, if the story ain't true, the kiss won't be either." That line would never appear in interviews. It wouldn't make headlines. But it changed the tone of the film. In the days that followed, rewrites came. The romance became slower, more layered. The eventual kiss, when it finally happened, felt earned, not expected. And audiences felt it. Critics praised the unexpected depth between the leads. They called it refreshingly mature. They never knew it started with a refusal. Years later, Shirley would speak in interviews about standing up for what felt right creatively. She'd mention that some co-stars resisted. But one didn't. Dean Martin, the man known for effortless charm, had shown something deeper that day. He didn't demand admiration. He offered respect. And in an industry often driven by ego, that quiet choice became the real story. Because sometimes the most powerful moment isn't the kiss. It's the pause before it. And sometimes, what the cameras catch isn't scandal, it's character. The morning after the rewritten scene, the studio offices were far less calm than the film set had been. In a polished conference room overlooking Los Angeles, executives replayed the footage. The air smelled of strong coffee and impatience. Romance sold tickets. Romance needed clarity. And clarity, in their minds, meant a kiss exactly where it was written. One executive leaned forward. "Why did they change it?" Another replied. MacLaine refused. The name carried weight. Shirley MacLaine was already known for her intelligence and independence. But challenging a scripted romantic climax opposite Dean Martin, that was bold. The head producer finally spoke. "What does Martin think?" No one was sure. On set, the atmosphere was steady but watchful. Crew members sensed something brewing. Word had spread that the studio wanted the original scene restored. That afternoon, Dean was called into a private meeting. The office door closed softly behind him. Across the desk sat two executives and the director. "Dean," one began, measured but firm, "we appreciate your flexibility yesterday. But we need the scene as written." Dean loosened his tie slightly. "Why, it's what audiences expect." He gave a small smile. "Audiences expect honesty more than anything." The producer slid the script forward. "It's just a kiss." Dean's expression shifted, not angry, not defensive, but thoughtful. "No," he said quietly. "It's not just a kiss. It's the turning point. If we rush it, we lose the build." There was silence. Hollywood had seen Dean Martin as charming, smooth, easygoing. Few had seen him argue for emotional integrity. One executive pressed further. "Are you saying you won't do it?" Dean leaned back in his chair. "I'm saying if we do it now, it won't mean anything. And when it doesn't mean anything, neither will the rest of the picture." The director cleared his throat. The take yesterday had something real. The room grew tense. Budgets were tight. Schedules tighter. Finally, the head producer sighed. "You're both under contract. We need cooperation." Dean nodded calmly. "You have it. But you hired us to make something good. Let us make it good." Later that evening, Shirley found him alone on the quiet soundstage, sitting near the darkened set. "They talked to you," she said. "They did?" And Dean shrugged lightly. "They want the kiss." She crossed her arms. "If it doesn't feel earned, I won't play it like it is." He looked at her seriously now. "And you shouldn't." There was no ego in his voice, no irritation, just certainty. "What made you back me up?" she asked after a moment. Dean glanced at the empty stage lights. "Because you were right. And because too many people in this town stopped speaking up once the cameras roll." The words lingered between them. The next day, filming continued, but something had shifted. The tension between their characters grew more layered. Glances lasted longer. Dialogue carried more weight. Crew members whispered that the chemistry felt different now, deeper, less manufactured. After several days of revised scenes, the studio reviewed the new footage. This time, the room was quieter. The slow burn worked. The absence of the early kiss created anticipation. When the emotional confession finally came later in the film, it felt authentic. One executive admitted reluctantly, "It plays better this way." The head producer nodded. "Keep it." The decision rippled back to the set. No announcement. No grand apology. Just a quiet continuation. When the eventual kiss was filmed weeks later, it wasn't rushed. It came after trust had formed between the characters. After vulnerability had been earned. The crew felt it instantly. No one called for a retake. As the director said, "That's the one." After wrap that evening, Shirley approached Dean again. "You didn't have to stand your ground," she said. He gave his familiar half-smile. "Kid charm's easy. Respect takes effort." The cameras had captured a romance. But behind them, something equally powerful had unfolded: a lesson in integrity. In an industry built on image, two actors had quietly chosen truth over formula. And though headlines never reported it, those who worked on that film remembered, because sometimes the strongest moment in a love story isn't the kiss, it's the courage to wait for it. When the film moved into its final weeks of production, something subtle had changed on set. It was not dramatic, it was not loud, but it was visible to anyone paying attention. The performances had deepened. Dean Martin no longer played his character with effortless charm. Alone, there was hesitation now, reflection, small pauses before lines that had once been delivered. With playful ease, Shirley MacLaine responded in kind. Her character's guarded exterior slowly softened, not because the script demanded it, but because the emotional rhythm felt earned. Crew members began staying quiet between takes, not out of tension, but out of focus. Something real was happening. One afternoon, the cinematographer approached the director. "They're not acting the way they were the first week," he said. "What do you mean? They're listening to each other now." That difference mattered. In earlier scenes, the camera had captured movement and dialogue. Now it captured silence, eye contact that lingered a second longer than written, or breath drawn before speaking, a hand almost reaching but stopping. These were not scripted choices. They were human ones. As filming progressed, word quietly spread through the studio that the production had found its emotional center. Executives stopped asking about the rewritten kiss. Instead, they began asking when they could screen a rough cut. The day of the first private screening arrived. In a dark projection room, studio heads, producers, and a few invited creatives watched carefully. There was no laughter during the opening romantic exchanges, only attention. The slow build created anticipation. Then came the pivotal late film scene. The moment when the two characters finally stood face to face, stripped of pride and defenses. Dean's character spoke first. His voice was steady but vulnerable. "I don't want to win you," he said. "I want to deserve you." Shirley's character held his gaze. For a long second, she said nothing. The silence stretched. No background music swelled. No dramatic movement interrupted the stillness. Then she stepped closer. This time, when the kiss came, it felt inevitable. In the projection room, no one shifted in their seats. When the lights came back on, the head producer cleared his throat quietly. "That works," he said. There were no grand speeches. No declarations of genius. Just recognition. After the screening, Dean stood outside the studio building, hands in his coat pockets. Shirley joined him. "They liked it," she said. "They did," he answered. She looked at him thoughtfully. "You could have taken the easy road." Dean gave a soft laugh. Easy's overrated. For him, the moment had never been about winning an argument. It had been about protecting the story. Protecting the emotional truth between two characters who needed time to grow. Weeks later, when the film premiered, critics noticed something they couldn't quite define. They wrote about unexpected restraint. They praised the slow-burning chemistry. They described the romance as mature and refreshingly believable. Audiences responded not with loud applause at the kiss, but with quiet engagement throughout the film. They leaned in. They felt the tension. They believed the connection. And belief was the real victory. Behind the scenes, crew members told their own version of the story for years. Not about refusal or conflict, but about collaboration. About a leading man who did not rely solely on charm, and a leading lady who trusted her instincts. The camera had captured more than a love story. It had captured respect. One evening near the end of the film's run, Shirley reflected on the experience during a small gathering with friends. Sometimes, she said, standing your ground isn't about defiance. It's about protecting something fragile. Across town, Dean sat in a quiet lounge, listening to soft music and thinking little about the headlines. To him, it had simply been another day's work at do it right, or don't do it at all. But those who had been there understood. The camera does not lie. It records hesitation. It records insincerity. It records when something feels forced. But it also records truth. And in that truth, two professionals had proven something timeless, that integrity behind the lens shapes what the world sees on screen. The kiss had mattered, but the choice to wait for it mattered more. Years passed, and the film became one of those quiet classics people return to late at night. It was not remembered for scandal. It was remembered for feeling real. In interviews, journalists often asked Shirley MacLaine about her bold personality, her willingness to challenge the system, her refusal to follow Hollywood's unwritten rules. She would smile thoughtfully, sometimes recalling that particular production without naming every detail. "It's important to trust your instincts," she once said during a television appearance. Even when it would be easier not to. What she did not always say was how rare it had been to find support in that moment. Dean Martin never made speeches about artistic integrity. He never publicly described the debate over the scene. To most people, he remained the relaxed crooner, the effortless entertainer, the man who made everything look easy. But those who had worked on that film remembered something else. They remembered a leading man who did not measure strength by dominance. They remembered someone who understood that chemistry cannot be demanded. It must be built. The studio executives eventually admitted, in their own quiet way, that the slower arc had strengthened the film. The audience response proved it. Letters arrived praising the emotional depth. Critics noted how rare it was to see a romance unfold without rushing physical closeness. What the camera had captured was patience. And patience had given the story weight. In the years that followed, Hollywood evolved. Scripts became bolder. Actresses gained more influence. Creative discussions grew more open. Change did not happen overnight. And it did not happen because of one film alone. But moments like that mattered. Moments when someone paused production to ask, "Does this feel true?" Moments when another voice answered, "Then let's make it true." One evening, long after the premiere, Shirley and Dean crossed paths at an industry event. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and conversation. Reporters circled the room. They greeted each other warmly. "Still no regrets?" she asked with a half-smile. Dean chuckled softly. "About waiting for the kiss?" "Not a one," she nodded. "It made the story better. It made it honest," he corrected gently. There was mutual understanding in that exchange, not romantic tension, not rivalry, but respect. That respect became the invisible thread tying their performances together on screen. When audiences rewatched the film years later, they often described feeling invested in the characters. They sensed growth, vulnerability, earned affection. Few knew the turning point had happened off-camera, during a quiet conversation where two professionals chose integrity over convenience. The legacy of that choice reached beyond the scene itself. It became a reminder that even in an industry built on spectacle, subtle decisions shape lasting impact. For aspiring actors who later heard whispers of the story, the lesson was simple: speak when something feels wrong. Listen when someone else speaks. And never confuse pressure with purpose. Dean continued his career with the same smooth presence the world adored. Shirley continued hers with intelligence and conviction. Their paths crossed in Hollywood's wide orbit, but that particular project remained a shared chapter. Not because of controversy, but because of character. In the end, the most powerful thing the cameras caught was not a refusal. It was collaboration. It was two artists choosing to protect the emotional truth of a story, and that truth outlived the headlines, the schedules, and the expectations. Because sometimes, what changes Hollywood is not a grand rebellion. It is a quiet decision made under bright lights. A decision to wait, to listen, and to earn the moment that finally belongs on screen.